Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the John Flansburgh to my John Linnell, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
This week we're talking about Banshees.
Bom, bom.
So I know this is kind of an aside real quick, but this would have been a great week to have a guest. We could have had the John Arbuckle to our Are They Mites Be Giants members.
Yeah, that would have been good.
Sorry, didn't mean to completely disrupt us before we even got started. But.
No. It's a good joke, and now I'm a little sad that I've wasted it, but that's fine. Yeah. So Banshees are an Irish myth. They can take several forms, but the most common through line is that they tend to keen or wail in sort of a preface to death. Like they'll warn people or press some sort of omen to an incoming death in the family. So you'll be sitting in your little Irish farmstead in the middle of the night, and you'll hear some screaming, like a screaming woman. And that is creepy and as fuck, and therefore also a warning that somebody is going to die soon.
In D&D, they've sort of been reinterpreted to their screams kill you.
Yeah, which I'm not super. I like the reinterpretation. I'm not sure if that's the direction we want to take it. But although I do like the Terry Pratchett interpretation, where the reason why it's not the screams that kill you, they're just giant like birds of prey, and therefore will literally tear you apart and eat you.
Interesting. I don't remember that, but
it's in, spoiler alert, I guess, but it's in Going Postal. It's the assassin that is hired to kill Moist von Lipwig is a male banshee who likes to eat pigeons, gets very sick from it because the pigeons in the city are gross. But yeah, I like that idea of them as sort of bird-like. But I'm down for the idea of them being sort of, so the name Banshee, she, the second part of that is the Irish word for like spirit or fairy, so named because they were thought to be some sort of ominous spirit. I like the idea of them being a spirit, of them being a creature of another world and not necessarily something super biological in this realm, because of going by the name, they should be sort of otherworldly, which is kind of cool. There's also a tidbit on the Wikipedia page about how it was supposed to have been only a single family in Ireland originally, or that's one of the versions of the legend, and that they will receive these omens basically only if you're related to this one family, or in fact that another idea is that each family has its own banshee that follows them around as a sort of guardian spirit. Is the wrong word, because I'm not entirely sure they're guarding you. They're sort of announcing your downfall. Maybe that's vengeance. I'm not sure. But that's really interesting to me. The idea that your family line might have a particular spirit that sort of is tracking you and interacting in that way.
I'm wondering if there's like some point in like the family history where like one of the women of the family like became a banshee, or if there's a spirit that like impersonates a particular family member.
Ooh, that's good. I like the idea of it being like the first mother of a family, like the matriarch or something like that.
Okay.
That's kind of cool. Yeah. There is the changeling myth of like people being impersonated and stuff, and so having a she that sort of like comes in and pretends to be a family member is interesting. I don't know why this would be the case, but for some reason I'm thinking about like the fairy and the she are these long-lived, eternally living creatures. They might not watch after humans. They might observe a family of humans the way that we might a lineage of like racehorses. Like they're keeping track of everything and sort of like selectively apply, like sort of like pushing the lineage in one direction or another.
Interesting.
I'm not sure how that would interact with the banshee itself, but it's a neat idea. Maybe it's for another monster. But
I like the idea that maybe that's like their method of interacting, like maybe they're not actually there like warning you about their death. They're like trying to get you to change your course of action because the way you're on would have like tainted the bloodline or something. Or
yeah. I'm down with that. I do like the idea that they're like a spirit that's ethereal. It's non-corporeal is the word I'm thinking of. So it can't directly interact with people, but it can influence the natural sounds of the world around you. Like it can cause like the wind to scream. It can cause maybe it could, they talk about babbling brooks and like water making talking noises. Maybe they could speak through water on occasion.
Okay.
Like if you know to listen for it.
Yeah.
and then they therefore try to guide and sort of interact with their chosen family of humans.
Yeah, I'm just imagining like you going out into a field and then like the cicadas or whatever just suddenly like having a very specific rhythm to them or something.
Yeah, that's cool. So I love the idea that there's not just one. There's a bunch of them and they all have their own sort of like territory worth of humans is the way I'm thinking of it. Like humans that are theirs, and that maybe it's one of those things where they need, like, they have to have a human that is part of their, we need a word for it, but like part of their, the cadre of humans that they control or can interact with. Yeah, they're stable. And they need one of them around in order to be able to interact with the world at all. So like the more those humans are around, the more power that creature has within the area. So like if you are a big family clan that has been living in some county in Ireland for 2,000 years, and you're related to everybody, and this Banshee has got their fingers into the entire community, they're very powerful locally.
Yeah.
Because everybody is sort of acting like an antenna for this particular creature. And then if one person emigrates out of that community and heads off to someplace else, they still can interact a little bit with the Banshee, but like they kind of drag it along with them, but only a little bit. Or if a whole family comes along, then like more of the Banshee comes along with them, and like it's able to still interact with them more. Like it really is predicated on the population of people in its area.
So do you think the Banshee wants them to like kind of stay together, or does it want them to like sort of expand out? Because I'm picturing like it could either go both ways. Like one, like having, family members in different parts of the world is like good for it, like just have like kind of that expansion and it can grow from there. But on the other hand, it might also be kind of irritating, like if like you're just like feeling like just like this slight sensation or something, but it's like in the other room, you're like, my scalp in the other room is kind of itchy over there.
Yeah. I definitely think that it's got to be, it doesn't want singular people to go out and settle in new lands, because that's annoying and it doesn't give it enough power to influence things. But it might really like the idea of like a large number of people. If it's well established in a particular area, a large number of the people from that area moving together to a new area would be good. It would expand its territory. But like if a single person goes off, then not enough of them are there in order to really give it a grounding. And it knows that version of itself is going to, like that area is a dead end for it. So it's not really going to pursue those. I think that'd be cool.
What happens if two families that are both like covered by a Banshee, so to speak, commingle?
That's what I'm thinking, is that the result, every time that there's a marriage and like you have new progeny, I think the two Banshees have to sort of like duke it out over it in a sort of non-corporeal, like, here we go. So you invite your spouse into your home, you both settle down and you start having kids. And during the early part of that family, both Banshees can interact with that family. They both get the ability to, because both of the adults are acting as the antennas. And it's whoever gets listened to more, whoever like is heard more by the family gains more and more power until they push the other Banshee out. So there's a time period where they're both in there essentially like shoving it against, like rubbing shoulder blades together, like trying to shove the other one out of the way. Like essentially like there's a microphone that they're both trying to yell into at the same time. And it's whoever gets listened to the most is the one who like can get onto that mic more often.
Do you think the families treat this like kind of like a fairy godmother kind of situation?
I love the idea that there'd be variability, because, like nobody's like, they never have such a direct interaction with the Banshee that they really get like you can't like get empirical evidence that this is happening. So it really is like tales that are put down through time, like, and so some of them might think of them as like house elves or brownies or something like that, or even like they might be afraid of them and like they're hearing them, but they're like, they think that they're a bad omen all the time, which is where the warning of death comes through, and they get creeped out by it. And that's because maybe their Banshee is using negative reinforcement. It has a very stern style and is really only hitting them at the bad times. But then you might have other ones that are like, think of that as, maybe they think of that as a relative of them or a god or something like that. And so I love the idea that there'd be multiple different, even within the same small community, if there's multiple banshees, there might be different families that approach that idea differently.
Do you think there's so is there like, you know, like 5 original families or something, or are there just like tons and tons, and like they just kind of are constantly vying for territory?
If I was writing this as a world, my decision would be that there are 13 banshees.
Sure, yeah.
Because it's a good number, right? And that all of them made some sort of deal with 13 people at the back at the beginning of history, right? Back in the age of gods and creatures. And that everything since then has been from one of those lines.
Okay.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
And and if you're writing this and you've got like the 13, it was originally 13 and now it's like 12 because one of the lines was allowed to die out because the Banshee didn't. And so you've got a Banshee who's like roaming around looking for a new entry point back into the world. That's cool. I'm down for that.
Or maybe that's just like the others, like kind of sort of contemplating like the idea of essentially mortality for their kind. Like,
yes, exactly.
They don't die, but like, isn't that worse than death? Is just being caught with nothing, like no way to interact with the world
and wandering off. And like, I love the idea that maybe, you know, this was all, let's say this was in Ireland. It's, you know, some hilltop in Ireland is where this all started. And then like maybe 1 or 2 families completely emigrated. Like the entire clan at some point early in the process left and has been off on their own. And the Banshee has had no contact with its own kind because it hasn't influenced in an area where any other Banshees have shown up. And then maybe that one could have grown quite quickly because it didn't have anybody competing for the resources of this family. So like you could have the New Yorker family with their Banshee who's taken over like states worth of people, you know, has this huge population of humans because it hit an untapped territory with no competition.
And so you've got like this whole like area that's just like they don't really have a cultural grounding for this information. So like it's just a bunch of like cryptozoological sightings of, you know, the screaming woman or whatever.
Oh yeah. It's the source of a bunch of cryptids and legends and ghost stories and stuff because because there are so many people, the entity itself might even be spread sort of thin. Like it's got a lot of influence on a lot of people that it can contact, but like it like only has so much attention and maybe can only be in one place at a time. And so therefore is really like spread around.
So what are a Banshee's motivations in this case?
That's a good question. What's it getting out of this relationship?
Exactly. Like we know that it can interact with the world, but what goals does it have?
It could, I mean, like my instinct is if it's some sort of fairy, then there's got to be like a game or a bet, maybe.
Oh yeah,
something like that. That they're trying to win what they think of as a game.
Like I picture almost like long-term reality television, but for the Fae.
Yeah, kind of. I'm thinking maybe. Yeah, like I love the idea that this is all like this comes back to some bigger plot that's back in the land of the Fae, right? Like this is in Mab's court. You have these 13 Banshees who are all competing with each other to I think I like the idea that maybe it's something like the whole game is going to run for, let's say 5,000 years. All right. And so now at this point in the story, we're like 3,000 years into it or something, or maybe we're coming up on the end. And the goal has always been who could have the most kings and queens.
Okay.
Like who would have the most heads of state. That would be cool. Like, and they get to hold them in their like pocket, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they get to sort of, and maybe it's one of those things where like maybe when somebody of in particular importance who is associated with the Banshee dies, maybe they come to the Fae court. Maybe that's how they get like recruited, and you're like building a cadre, like a troop, or like an army or something.
Like so, like
kind of pulling that and Harryar idea.
It's like that 5,000 years ago, like the original 13 made these deals that were like everyone in your family will be kings.
Yeah,
but when your time comes, you're ours.
Yes. I like that. Yeah, that's a good deal. That's a very much a kind of Fae deal of like, yeah, if you make this deal with me, you're gonna get the benefit of having a Fae in your pocket and working for you, and you can listen to our advice. And I'm gonna make you kings. If you make this deal now, you will have some of your sons or your sons' sons or something down the line will be kings. And in exchange, like, you know, I'm gonna pull from this collection in order to make a team, basically, is kind of what I'm thinking, like a group of people. So like maybe there's if you're writing this as like a young adult novel, then it's like you have the chosen protagonist, right? The kid who's been pulled, who is the scion of this group, who gets like pulled into like the final game or something like that, where like it's 5,000 years have passed, the closing time has fallen through, and this is the last person to be chosen, and they got chosen ahead of time because they didn't like 5,000 years had passed. We can't wait for you to die, so we're just going to grab you now and use you for something. And they're like going back and meeting all of their ancestors from this Banshee clan, basically, who have been pulled out of their moment of death in order to like show up in the to fight in the final Hunger Games, I guess. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but like something along those lines. If you're not going to do a Hunger Games, it needs to be something more like a race, like Wacky Racers or something like that, where like everybody's in cars. Or I mean, like, or if you want to go medieval, then something like a tournament where there's multiple events and you have to choose a champion for each one. So you've got like jousting and ground combat and archery and stuff like that. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah. So what the Banshee are getting is they're doing all of this work to get access to all these people, so that from that collection of people they can grab. Maybe it's limited by number too. Maybe like each of the 13 Banshees gets 13 champions, which they get to pull.
Nice symmetry there.
Yeah. And then like if for the story purposes, what I would do is say that like the one who is associated with our protagonist has been ultra cautious and hasn't, like everybody else picked their 13 like 150 years ago, you know, like they didn't run out the clock the way this last one did. Yeah. And this last one was like choosy. It was like, nobody quite measures up. And then they get to that last moment and the 13th one is still not picked and they're down to the wire. So like, this kid, let's just grab him. I need somebody. Yeah. I need a warm body. And then they get dragged into the whole like tournament business, and they have to figure out what this kid can do in order to succeed. Because I guess in this case, the stakes for the humans is that like maybe if they lose, they die forever, and if they win, then they manage to live on. Or maybe maybe it's that the failing cadre, because they're bound to service for the Banshee, and the Banshee has wagered something on this bet. It's that like you're going to spend the next 1,000 years in service to the winner of the court, right? Like if whoever wins this gets this whole group of powerful mortal souls to command for 1,000 years or something. And you want to make sure that the good one, like maybe that's even the plot twist, is that like you come in and you're on the side of the original Banshee, the kid's Banshee. And then over the course of the tournament, you realize what the stakes are, and the kid realizes, oh wait, I can still quote unquote win by throwing the game, but making sure that one of the good Banshees, one of the ones who will be put us to good use or won't be mean or whatever, wins. And therefore all of the humans get put under control of this one, otherwise benevolent, creature, or at least the least evil, maybe, since we are talking about the Fae here. Yeah. They're probably not really good, but
the least capricious.
The least capricious. Yeah. And that, I guess that brings back in the keening before death, because maybe that noise is a manifestation of one of these people being chosen, or at least maybe them being considered. It's when it's the Banshee being extra present in the world during that time, so that it can like really consider somebody and whether or not they're going to get pulled or not. And so maybe the difference between like, I'm just going to let him die, I don't actually need this one, versus like, no, we're gonna like, I'm gonna take this soul, is like, you get different kinds of streams or something like that, different kind of keening. And then maybe the ones who get chosen, maybe Jedi style, instead of dying and just having a corpse, like they literally disappear or something like that. That'd be kind of cool.
I do like the idea that like their concentration noise is just a prolonged scream. It's like,
well, like that's not that. I mean, like I like that because it's super alien. Yeah. It's like not even really a scream. It's just like the sound of their attention. Like it literally is like when they just pay extra attention to the world, it causes like disturbances in the sounds around them. And I love the idea that I do really like the idea that it's natural sounds that have been twisted and warped by the power of the Fae. It's, you're hearing, just the wind, but it's wind that has like had a woman's scream wrung out of it. That's cool. That's very creepy.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else can we do with this idea? We know, so the Fae or the She are fighting over these little like in families or whatever. Maybe they also, you could like not expand outward. Like you could stop paying attention to a family if they sort of drift away. Like if you don't cultivate that connection as the she, then it dies away. So that they don't have like an exponential growth problem where like over the course of 5,000 years, because apparently I've been told this fact. I don't have no way of checking up on it, but apparently anybody alive now is essentially by statistical likelihood, you are related to everyone who was alive in 100 BC or 0 AD. Like right at as of 2,000 years ago, anybody who was alive at that point and then went on to have children, they are an ancestor of everyone living today.
Interesting.
Like the way that the way the genetic gene pool mixes up is such that those genes get, dispersed. So if you had made this deal, if that's true, and you made this deal 5,000 years ago, then everybody was a target and everybody was available to be pulled by the she. And that seems like a lot for these creatures to manage.
Yeah.
They might have, like they're only cultivating a small subset of the population makes sense to me. Anyway.
Yeah. I feel like they would basically be the equivalent of pruning as they go.
Yeah. They're just like not worrying about it. And then you can see them like snapping their fingers in frustration as they let that line die out or escape their control. And then, that's where some great hero, that's like, like Jack Churchill or something like that was in one of those. Mad Jack Churchill. Do you know Mad Jack Churchill?
That sounds familiar. He was the guy with the sword, right?
Yes. Yeah. So he's the guy who he went into World War II with a claymore and bagpipes. He was a captain in the British Army. I think he was actually in the Marines specifically. And he is the only person on record to have gotten a kill with a bow and arrow in World War II. Because he at one point they were sneaking up on some dudes, so he pulled out his bow and arrow to shoot him with the arrow because it would like make less noise than a gun. And he was captured at one point. He was a captain, so his entire unit had been wiped out. And when the Germans came up on him, he was sitting in amongst all of his dead men playing the bagpipes. They captured him. He then escaped, was recaptured, escaped again, walked all the way to, I think, Spain, and then managed to make his way back to Britain. And what basically got back to Britain, and I think he might have had to go to the hospital, and then came out of the hospital just in time for the war to end. And he was like unhappy about it. He's like, God damn it, we had such a nice war going on. It was so much fun that, if the stupid Jerry's hadn't surrendered, we could have kept this going for another couple of years. And I'm like, that's a guy that you would want to recruit, right?
Yeah,
that's a champion right there. Okay, so do we think that what's that final tournament look like? Do we think it's like medieval style tournament, or is it
I mean, that's usually a pretty, like, it might be like a duel or.
Yeah. I feel like it's got to be, if it's 13 contestants, then that means you've got 13 rounds, one for each of them. Or maybe more than that. Maybe like each person has to do a couple of rounds. That means you could also get team sport style stuff in there, where like you have to pair up our young protagonist. Oh God. Sorry. We talked about jousting earlier. And I love the idea that in the jousting round, one of the people has to be turned into the horse.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's so fey. That's actually really good. Yeah. So you've got some number of events. And so in that case, I think that going weird with it is super cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Like one of them is just like an entire season of Bake Off, like where you.
I love the idea of like that's just something like one of the Fae got really into Great British Bake Off, and
yeah, no, I think the rounds had to have been set by individual Fae who are the judges for all of this, and they all just get to make up their crap. And so like, yeah, one of them is like, oh, we're going to do Bake Off. Yeah. In fact, he like manifests a version of the hosts in order to like go through the whole thing. That's something that I think sometimes these stories kind of lack on, is just like, you can go weird.
Oh, yeah.
You can make it strange. Like, as cool and iconic as the 12 tasks of Hercules are, like 9 of the 12 tasks are all just go somewhere and either kill or capture a monster. Like, come on, guys, you can do better than that. Like, for sure. Like, come on. Like, at least one of them was like clean out a stable full of poop, and they had to be like clever about it. And the rest of them, it's like the first or second task is to kill the Hydra, and he kills the Hydra, and the Hydra has venom or poisonous blood or something. So he dips his arrows in the blood, and then just uses those to kill everybody else for the rest of the time. Like he gets his super overpowered weapon in task number 2, and then just uses it to get out of every. Sorry, I got problems with the way that the Herculean myth works. I guess I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah, it's a little unfortunate they went that route.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's just a particular version that I remember reading.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's probably various versions out there.
It just reminds me of like those old like the Japanese like Power Rangers type stuff where like, okay, now we'll use our ultimate attack.
Yes. It's like, why didn't you just start, like, don't ever try to hit them with the Megazords separate. Like, always just go ahead and form
Just
the main
overkill
dude.
every time.
And always pull out your sword first thing. It's fun. Like, you don't need to, like, okay, so what are other event styles we have? We have medieval style tournaments with jousts and stuff. We have Bake Off. What else?
God, I feel like one of them would be an orgy just because Fae.
Yeah, I don't know how to make that into a competition, though. I mean, there are ways.
There are ways.
But not ways that I could put into it, because I framed this as a young adult novel up until this moment, and I think that
It's definitely be going off the rails there.
yeah, or like maybe it's one of those things where in the book you can tell that that's what happened, but it all happens off screen because of course they didn't invite the kid to that, and so like that's the opportunity for him to go off and have another adventure with the other Banshee, like the non-team Banshee people who like are, you know, you can meet the interesting creative people from. Your little minor characters that you didn't have a chance to showcase. Yeah. And then just like that way when the kids read it, they won't understand what's going on. But then, you know, you reread it as an adult and you go, there was an orgy happening in the background there because it was the Fae.
Yes. I feel like there'd be like some sort of like, almost like a dog or pony show, like where like you're supposed to have like groomed some animal or something.
I think more than that, I think it would be something like growing a really big potato, like pumpkin or something.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's, you know, like it's county fair style where like you have to go somewhere and like do a thing in order to make a really big vegetable, and then they get shown off.
And every year there's like, you know, how that's like the previous year's you know, Miss America or whatever hosting. Like this, it's always like the fairy godmother from Cinderella who's just like, my carriage pumpkin is over here.
That's great. I also like the idea that in this particular contest, when whatever vegetable wins, they like turn that into a Fae, like it becomes a big pumpkin man, and then he's just hanging around for the rest of the series. There's got to be one that's like games of chance too. There's got to be some fairy who is really into like chess and backgammon and roulette and stuff like that. And so there's one person who's got to like do the gambling thing.
Well, I love the idea that there's one that's just like purely just luck. Like he's like,
oh yeah,
and like, how do you make a competition out of this? Like, I don't care, just do it.
Yes, yeah. It's like if we're going dark, since we're on the edge of going dark, it's like this just Russian roulette. Like here's a gun with one, here's a revolver with 13 cylinders and one bullet.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. Oh, of course, one of them is going to be who can escape the wild hunt the longest.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's good. For those of you who don't know what the wild hunt is, it's a recurring mythological. It's like a Germanic myth of where the Fae or the spirits of the wilderness will just like find humans and hunt them down like foxes. After, you know, they bring along their dogs and they're riding their big old fairy horses, and they'll just hunt you down. There's some classical music that's even based off that too. Anyway, yeah, the wild hunt is very cool. It shows up all over the place. Sometimes it's said to be led by Odin. Sometimes it's said to be led by other people. You know, King of the Fae or so whatever. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I could see like composing music being one of the.
Oh yeah, musical competition would be great. And if this, I said a young adult novel, but I'm also kind of pulling from like an isekai style anime.
Yeah.
And so having the musical episode would be great, like for sure.
Wait, why are all the banshees at the beach?
Okay, well, what else can we do with these guys before we're done with them? We haven't really talked about like the form of the Banshee at all, because they seem very incorporeal and sort of.
I know in legend, like they're like almost always like a wailing woman.
Yeah. So maybe that's one of the things is that all of these Banshees are females or feminine presenting or something. I wonder is there a connection between these 13 Fae that like Like, why did they get put into this scenario where they were, a few thousand years ago, all willing to go in on this long deal?
What if they were like the 13 wives of the original lords?
So like the human lords,
yeah,
all married a fae.
yeah,
Interesting.
like the 13 fairy princesses or something.
I had an idea. I think we can merge this, because the idea I had was maybe it's the same fae who accidentally duplicated themselves.
Interesting.
Like a transporter accident style, where accidentally there's multiple ones and they're trying to figure out which one is the true, like the real one.
Oh, and that's how they decided to resolve it, was with this 5,000 year game of chance.
Because it was originally a outsmart this one fae accidentally duplicates themselves 13 times, and Queen Mab comes down and is like, dude, you can't do that. We need to figure out which, like, one of you is going to go on and the other 12 of you are all going to die. And so then their quote way of getting out of it, like their way to resolve it, is to have this really long-term game where they are trying to resolve it. But in the course of it, they get 5,000-6,000 years of time to just f around and be themselves. But like the idea is that, or one of the ideas maybe is that you could still have like the original versions of them all marry the same, different guys, or maybe it was the same, like it was a mortal man and they duplicate him too. And so you end up with like these guys all having to go off and like form their own. I'm deeply obsessed with the idea of duplicates having to like carve out their own space in the world.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of cool. I wonder or could it be a way, all of this was a way to get around the human and fae can't marry idea? Like, is that maybe that's a law? The humans and the fae can't marry each other or something like that. And then this was all just a big long con to get that away.
Interesting.
Or maybe it's one of those things where like maybe the law itself was that when human and fae marry, the humans can't stay on Earth. They can't stay on immortal soil. They have to come to the fae realm and like essentially live out the rest of their days there. And this is the long con to like allow those guys to stay, to see whose bloodline would like manage to stay within the system or like and prevail. And so like then they get to figure out, it's half game, half experiment, maybe like a way to figure out if they could maybe change this law.
I also do really like the idea, going back, like just that, like the game isn't just for the humans. Like it's very important to the fae. Like it's not just like something to pass the time. Like this sort of decides their fate as well. Oh yeah.
I really do like the idea that the one that wins gets to live and the rest of them all get destroyed. Which is where the duplicate idea came down. And I like the idea they've had 5,000 years to diverge in that way. So they're all really different people that have the same sort of basic blueprint originally, but have had, 6,000 years to define their own identity and are now very different from one another. And this is going to collapse the waveform, and we're going to have one of them at the end of all of this. And the tournament gets to decide which one that is. That's very cool to me.
Yeah.
I also like the idea of it also, depending on which one of them wins, could also change something for the mortal world as well. Like, or the way that the mortal world is interacted with by the fae, like maybe it's depending on which one wins or loses, maybe the door between the fae and human worlds will be closed forever or opened fully. And then like the fae are going to pour back into the, to the mortal world. That could be kind of cool.
I like the idea that maybe it's like the Banshees basically form a bridge between the fae and the mortal world. And like when that's finally closed off after these 5,000 years, like all the fae that had been like enjoying access to the mortal realm are going to be like, wait, that's gone now?
Oh, maybe it's more like all 13 of them form individual bridges that have been they're not that strong individually because they're, the power of whatever bridge that was has been split 13 ways. And instead you have at the end of this, when the other 12 are all killed off and only one of them remains, then that particular fae is now completely in control of all of the connection between the mortal world and the fae world.
Oh yeah.
And so which one of the 13 wins really determines what happens afterward. And so you have all of these political factions amongst the fae all vying to manipulate the games and cheat and stuff, because if they influence the outcome of the tournament, they get to just decide who gets put in charge of who can go to the mortal world or not. And then that will either they can close it off, or maybe they'll open it up more, or maybe they'll only let through some Fae who can then have access to the mortal world in order to get whatever it is that they want there, the memes and pop songs or something like that, whatever is valuable in the Fae realm.
But regardless, whatever Banshee comes out on top is going to have a huge amount of influence.
Yeah, that, which is really cool. Like, and then that, I mean, again, if we're thinking sort of young adult style novel series, then like, if that's book 1 or maybe books 1 through 3, then that gives you an inflection point for the plot, you know, where suddenly it goes off into the next stage of the plot, where the tournament is over. You are, you know, the human is now serving the whichever Banshee won the tournament, and that Banshee is now also in control of the bridge between the fairy realm and the human realm. And you also have all of the fairy factions who are most of whom are upset with the way it turned out, because most of them were vying for the other Banshees. And so now you have a whole bunch of politics and maybe even a war amongst the Fae and the humans or something like that at the end of it.
Yeah.
That's cool. That can be very big.
Definitely.
All right. Well, I think we've covered this pretty well. So we're going to start something new. I've solicited questions off of Twitter
already
from some of our listeners. And these are supposed to be, we're not going to spend too much time on them. We're going to be kind of, well, now actually, you know, you and me, we're probably going to spend more time on them than any of them individually like would normally deserve, because we're the kind of person who gets interested in stuff.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah. So I'm just going to start grabbing a couple of these. I've got a whole bunch, and any of them, if you sent questions to me on Twitter and they don't get said today, then I will be keeping them around in case we need them for the future. So don't worry too much about that. So to start with, Alexandra Kane at Exandra Kane writes, Changelings. Read a beautiful essay on postpartum depression, and the first thing I thought was, oh my God, is this why changeling legends exist? Which is I hadn't heard that particular take on the changeling legend. We talked about them not briefly. We had an entire episode about changelings in the past, although we did sort of the changeling of D&D, the sort of the doppelganger idea. I've heard theorized several times that certain neurodivergent disorders, especially things on the autism spectrum, tend to manifest at the age when that coincides with some of the changeling myths. And so I've read reports from parents of autistic children who say that's kind of what it felt like. Like one day they had quote unquote a normal child, and the next day it was replaced by another being that they didn't connect with anymore. So I've heard that theory a lot of times, but I have not heard the idea of it being for postpartum depression. But that is a really interesting interpretation of the changeling legend.
Yeah, like I know, like sort of like the feeling is basically just sort of a sense of just not having any kind of connection with your kid. And like, I can absolutely see how that would feel like my baby's been replaced, or, you know, I'm supposed to feel something different. So this is clearly not my kid.
Yeah, I really could see the origin for that. That's a really cool interpretation. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add, because I just kind of broadly agree with you.
Yeah.
That would be a really good metaphor book to write. If you were looking for somebody who has experienced postpartum depression or has experience with it, that would be a really great like novel, like short novel, like maybe fantastic realism or something like that, where you could actually write. Taking a modern person who, you know, using that as a metaphor to deal with the idea of things like postpartum depression would be really interesting. I would love to read that book. Okay. Well, like I said, I don't have a lot to add to that one, because it's a good idea. It's very cool.
Absolutely.
I just kind of broadly agree with it. Okay. Friend of the show, Richard Kreutz-Landry at R. Kreutz-Landry writes, what's the f***iest monster you've created? So we had to look up fuckiest on the Urban Dictionary, because neither of us knew what that means.
We figured it could go a couple of routes, but
it could go a couple of routes. We've decided to go with the definition that is the one that works the least, is like the jankiest creature. Yeah. And the thing is, that's not something that I think we do a lot of. We tend to really dig into stuff and try to make them kind of work. But we've had some weird ones. I'll give a special shout out to our version of Weeping Angels, which is a cool concept. I don't think it doesn't work, but what it doesn't work in specifically is the context of trying to actually like use it, that story idea for something. I've had at least one, I think even two people who've said that they've thought extensively on how to turn that idea into like something you could use for an RPG, and it just does not work because it relies on time loops.
Yeah.
Like you can only have that exist in a world where you can predict the outcome and then go back and mush the timeline around. And in the concepts of in an RPG that just kind of doesn't work.
Yeah, that's really only like a short story kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
if anyone ever figures out how to make that work for a tabletop game, please let me know, because I would love to hear it.
Yeah. Again, it was meant for, or not meant, but like as we were writing it, I was thinking the same thing. It's like short story, an episode of television, something like that. That kind of format would work really well. Do you have one that you think is f***iest?
I think is from just like most up. I think my vote would be for the Umplebee, just because it's a horrible monster that makes nets out of hair and will groom your hair off.
I'm so proud of our Umplebee because that creature is so sad in the original D&D manual, and we made it truly unsettling, which is really great. So yeah, anybody who's looking for a particular up creature, go check out our Umplebee episode. It's way back at the beginning. Something like episode 10. Jesus Christ. It's covered in hair, and it makes hair spider webs.
Yes.
And like it robs people of their hair to put into its own like matted fur, like it or luscious fur, I forget. And it uses that to then hunt bugs by capturing them in the hair. Love that idea. Okay. KJ at Lunar Arboretum asks, what's your respective favorite monsters that have ever been featured on the show? So what's your favorite?
Favorite monster? Oh, you asked that now, and I'm suddenly blanking on literally everything we've ever done.
Yeah, I'm glad I pulled up the list here, because we've got, and some of these I'm looking at, I'm like, I see a listed for the name. So like Mogwai, for example. I don't remember at all what we did for Mogwai. It's got like one of our top listens so far, and people like that episode. I do not remember what we did at all.
Yeah.
I do remember our very heavy-handed vampires are capitalists sucking the blood out of the working classes narrative, which was pretty good. Our version of Beholders, with the eyes that come back up out of the eye stalk and to replace the ones that are burned out, is pretty gross.
Yeah.
And eye eggs was in that one.
Ugh.
Yeah. I think those, I mean, like children, you can't really pick a favorite, of course.
I mean, like children, you kind of can.
Sometimes. I mean, I've heard this, you can't pick a favorite. You can definitely pick your not favorites.
Sure, yeah.
And some of those early episodes, before we'd really figured out what we were doing, we don't really have a straight concept for them.
I really liked the Rust Monsters episode. Like we didn't spend much time on the actual Rust Monsters themselves, but I just loved what came out of that.
Oh yeah, the world that had been colonized basically by a giant robot that had fallen from the sky and embedded itself in the world, and all of its little nanotech machines had like gone into the world and infused it, and it basically became the basis for all of the D&D tropes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, where like it caused magic and everything too. That's a good one. The secret to our episodes is that we nominally are talking about a monster, and then we just spend all of the time world building. Like today. Today was like that too. Yeah. All right. And then I got one final one today from Grays at _Grayest. What about robots?
What about robots?
We've done robots.
We have done
in a couple of versions. Like
we got the Terminator as one of our.
Yeah. The interesting robots are an interesting story story element because every good robot story I've ever read has really been about humanity. It's about questioning what is humanity or not. And so in that sense, like there's the mundane version of the robot where they are very clearly a human or very clearly not a human. But the interesting stories are always about what is or is not human, or what even not what it means to be human, but rather what it means to be a person in a society where you are not human. I'm going to shout out the Murderbot Diaries as a really interesting set of novellas and then one novel. And the main character in it, the sec unit, who calls itself Murderbot, is very clear about its intentions. It does not want to be human, and it doesn't want to be more human-like, and it initially doesn't really want to connect with humans, but it is very much a person, and it's grappling with its own personhood is a very interesting story.
Yeah. I think there's always plenty of things to be told, from that particular angle with robots. I feel like as a monster, they're kind of there with like zombies, where they're sort of an an easy monster to make because you can make their motivations as clear or unclear as you want.
Yep.
There's definitely options to do something cool with robots, but I feel like it's often overlooked.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, like one of the things, of course, is that people tend to make, I mean, like I said, the interesting stories about whether or not robot stories are about what it means to be human. If you wanted to make them an interesting monster, you have to make them less human. Yeah. You know, you have to emphasize the fact that robots don't have to be shaped like people and they don't have to think like people. So like creating a version of robots that doesn't just look like a metal dude with batteries inside of him, who, I don't know, talks with a British accent and is very officious, or doesn't use contractions, but still ladies. Shout out to Data on, sorry, it's in one episode. It's like the third episode, and Data is like never again shown to be horny at all. But like in this one episode, he's allowed to get drunk because of science magic, and everybody on the ship is drunk, and he boinks with a lady. And then they call back to it like it's an important thing that keeps happening, and it's like I do not understand what. Sorry, my next generation hot takes aside. When you emphasize how a creature like that, an artificial being, is not human, could be really interesting, for sure. All right. Well, on that case, I think we are going to be done. If you have questions for us, whether it's about the show or just about monsters in general, or creatures, or world building, or even just random crap, see how surprising you can make it. I don't care. You can tweet at us. We are at MonsterMPod on Twitter, and that's it for us today.
All right. Until next time.
See you in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Monster Mechanics. Hey, did you know that I have a second podcast called Breathing Space, Fading Frontiers that I did some writing and performing and directing and editing for? You can even hear Zach in a couple of the episodes. We're about halfway through our first season. You can find it anywhere podcasts are sold at. If you just search for Breathing Space, Fading Frontier. Now for the credits. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by me, Scott Paladin, and hosted by myself and my best friend, Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas generated during this podcast are released under a do what the beep you want public license.